Welcome to the assignment guide for the Developing Professional Practice module. This is a CIPD module and is often referred to as 5DVP. I'm Tracy Callaghan and I'll be taking you through the Developing Professional Practice assignment guide. If you have any queries or questions along the way, you can contact me on tracy@professionalfutures.com. And you can visit our website Professional Futures, where you can find more resources to help you with this assignment. So in this assignment guide, we'll start to have a look at the 5DVP or the Developing Professional Practice module. We'll have a look at what support is available to you by way of videos which support each of the assessment criteria. We'll then move on to have a look at how you should present your assignment, and then we'll finish by having a look at specific answers for the assessment criteria. So by the end of this session, you will be able to answer all of the assignment questions. For Learning Outcome 1, you're asked to understand what is required to be an effective and efficient HR professional. So this is broken down into two assessment criteria. 1.1 is evaluate what it means to be a HR professional, making reference to the current CIPD profession map, and assessment criteria 1.2 asks you to briefly describe the element of group dynamics and give at least 2 examples of conflict resolution methods within a HR context. To help you to answer Learning Outcome 1, which was understand what is required to be an effective and efficient HR professional, 3 videos have been created to support you with this. Video 2 includes an overview of the HR profession map. Video 3 looks at some models of group dynamics, and Video 4 looks at conflict resolution methods. So Video 2 aligns to Assessment Criteria 1.1, and both Video 3 and 4 will be useful to help you answer Assessment Criteria 1.2. Moving on to Learning Outcome 2, which is be able to perform efficiently and effectively as a HR professional. This says, with reference to a recent or a current project, and that project can be large or small, which you have led or been part of the project team, you should be able to provide evidence of using project management in the course of the project, and that will help you cover Assessment Criteria 2.1. With reference to the recent or current project which you've led or been part of, you should be able to provide evidence of using problem-solving techniques in the course of the project, and that will help you to complete Assessment Criteria 2.2. And for 2.3, you're asked to explain how you successfully influenced, persuaded and negotiated with others in the course of the project. If you didn't influence, persuade or negotiate during the project, you can choose an other related activity. So to help you answer Learning Outcome 2, which was be able to perform efficiently and effectively as a HR professional, I've produced 3 videos to map over to the assessment criteria. Video 5 explains components of project management and breaks it down into chunks that you may recognise as part of your project. Video 6 explains problem-solving techniques and again provides examples of problem-solving techniques that you might have used during your project. And Video 7 explains how to influence, persuade and negotiate. So you can see clearly that Video 5 relates to Assessment Criteria 2.1, Video 6 relates to Assessment Criteria 2.2, and Video 7 relates to Assessment Criteria 2.3. Moving on to look at Learning Outcome 3, which is be able to apply CPD techniques to construct, implement and review a personal development plan. This is split into 3 assessment criteria, and Assessment Criteria 3.1 asks you to undertake a self-assessment of one area of your practice, to identify your professional development needs in that area, and then come up with some options to address these needs. Assessment Criteria 3.2 asks you to then produce a professional development plan or a PDP, which will help you to meet your professional development needs. And here you need to include a justification of the options that you choose. And Assessment Criteria 3.3 asks you that during your programme you should provide a reflective summary of your performance against the plan, and you should also identify any future development needs and record these in your PDP. So to help you complete Learning Outcome 3, which was be able to apply CPD techniques to construct, implement and review a personal development plan, I've created 3 videos which will help you to answer each assessment criteria. So Video 8 explains the self-assessment of one of the professional areas. Video 9 explains the production of a development plan. And Video 10 explains the completion of a development record. So you can see Video 8 relates to 3.1, Video 9 relates to 3.2 and Video 10 relates to 3.3. These videos are particularly useful because I've included examples of a self-assessment, including a template that you could use to complete your own. In Video 9, I've included an example of a development plan and included a template of a plan that you could use to complete your own. And again in Video 10, I've included an example of a development record and included a template that you can use. Now we've had a look at the assessment criteria and you now know which videos support each of them, we'll now turn our attentions to see how you should present your work. For this assignment, it states that you should present your work as an e-portfolio, and this is because you need to make logs and records throughout the year to evidence your developing professional practice. You need to make sure that on your front page you have stated your name, and you also need to state the name of the qualification. So in this case it would be CIPD Level 5 Certificate in Human Resource Management. You also need to give the work-based assignment title, so in this case that will be Developing Professional Practice. And you need to remember that on every page you should also insert your name, your CIPD membership number and the page number in the footer. There is an example of an e-portfolio at the end of the assignment guide booklet. Here are some other points you should consider when presenting your work. You need to choose a clear font, and Arial is a good example of this. The size of your font is also important, and size 10 or 11 is recommended for this assignment. Another consideration is the line spacing, and 1.5 is also recommended for this assignment, and both of these help the readability of your work both for you and the reader. You should insert an additional line space between paragraphs, and again this helps to improve the readability of your work. It also signifies that you're moving on to a different topic. You should submit your work in black ink, and remember not to use italics unless you're using direct quotes. There's no requirement for you to insert borders or frames on your pages, and therefore you should refrain from including these. And finally, you should submit your work using Microsoft Word. This will allow you to gain feedback in an electronic format. The next section is the contents page, so you would include this on the next page. For this you need to include a list of all of the sections and the corresponding page numbers, and you need to remember to include the appendices. So an example has been included here. The next section is the introduction. So for this, you should give the name of your organisation and say briefly what it does and when it was established. You could then say what part you play, so you could describe your own role and then state your responsibilities. So it might cover your responsibilities for other people, or for resources in the organisation, or the particular work activities that you undertake. And finally, this is not assessed, but it will set the scene for the assessor. Following on from the introduction, you need to consider how to answer the questions. For this, you should insert the heading shown in the assignment brief, and then underneath insert the assessment criteria for that assignment question, and you should present this in italics. So for example, understand what is required to be an effective and efficient HR professional, which is learning outcome 1, and then assessment criteria 1.1 follows next, which is evaluate what it means to be a HR professional, making reference to the current CIPD profession map. Once you've inserted the learning outcome and the assessment criteria as your heading, you can write your response to the question underneath. Once you have answered all of the assessment criteria, you'll need to include the conclusion and recommendations. It's good practice to produce a section for conclusion and recommendations for all assignments, and if your assignment question asks you to do this, then produce this as part of the question under discussion. However, in this case, a conclusion is not specifically requested, so you should produce one after the final question has been answered and place this under a separate heading. So when you're writing up your conclusion and recommendations, it's important to remember that this is an opinion of your findings, so it's not just your report reworded, or it's not just a summary of the report. You should make sure that you don't introduce anything new at this stage. So if you're relying on anything for you to be able to make your recommendations, you need to ensure that you've already discussed this within one of your assessment answers. So this is not the stage to introduce anything new. What it should do is connect all of the main themes that run through your report. When you consider your recommendations, you should make sure that it includes suggestions for improvements, or perhaps action which would resolve some of the problems that you've highlighted during your report. The next section is your appendices, and this will come at the end of your report, and you'd use this section to add in any extra information that you feel is necessary but that doesn't need to be in the main report itself. So perhaps there's some information that you'd like to include, but you think it would alter the flow of the assignment, in which case you can place this in the appendices. You can place anything in the appendices which will help the assessor to grasp more clearly what you're trying to say. Or it could be anything that will help to explain the background situation. Or it could be anything that will demonstrate more clearly that you've done the necessary information gathering to underpin your recommendations. So the example for this assignment is for assessment criteria 3.1, where you're asked to complete a self-assessment against a professional area. You might decide to include the activities and knowledge of your chosen area for your chosen band, and that might help with the flow of the assignment if you place this information, as stated by the CIPD, into the appendices. The final section to consider is the references and bibliography. The references relate to any quotes that you've used in your report, or anything that you've read and then put into your own words. So effectively here, you're giving credit to the author who came up with the original idea. The list should be presented alphabetically, and this is based on the last name of the author. And you need to use the Harvard referencing system to present your reference list. The bibliography relates to anything that was relevant that you did read but that you didn't quote in the report. You should also present this alphabetically, and again this is based on the last name of the author, so if you used a textbook or an article you should find the author and find the last name. And again this needs to be presented using the Harvard referencing system. If you're not familiar with the Harvard referencing system or you just need a refresh, you can see our separate video which takes you through a step-by-step guide. The keywords used in this assignment include describe, explain, evaluate, undertake, produce and provide. So to describe means that you will give an account of the principal features of the topic. So here you will select some of the more important features and then you'll give a degree of detail which is required to make this a description. An explanation means that this involves some description of the topic but also with an account of the practices or the uses associated with the topic. It can also imply some reasons for those practices, and it will also require a level of skill which will depend on the level of your assignment and also the certificate or the award or the diploma. So the higher the level means the greater the explanation. Evaluate is the next verb, and this means that you need to select and list appropriate items from information that you've been given or collected. So in this case, you would need to evaluate some of the areas and behaviours from the HR profession map. The next is to undertake, and this means to do or to complete. So in this case, you're asked to complete a self-assessment of one area of your practice to identify your professional development needs in that area, and then you're also asked to give some options to address these needs. So you will undertake a self-assessment. The next verb is to produce, and this means to create or to assemble. So in this assignment you're asked to produce a professional development plan which helps you to meet your professional development needs. You're also asked to include a justification of the options that you've decided to choose. And the final verb is to provide, and this means to produce or to supply the evidence. So in this assignment, you'll need to complete and submit a reflection of your activities that you've taken part in order to be able to achieve the objectives that you had on your development plan. So at the end of your studies, you will be able to provide a development record. So let's start to have a look at the assessment criteria in more detail. So 1.1 asks you to evaluate what it means to be a HR professional, making reference to the current CIPD profession map. And video 2 will help you to answer this question. So you should start off by explaining what the HR map is, and you would include the main parts and its structure. So you will make sure that you include the knowledge, the skills and the behaviours which are required by HR professionals. And to do this, you'll explain that the map is made up of professional areas, the behaviours and the bands. Once you drill down into the bands, this is where you'll be able to include the knowledge and the activities and the skills. It's a good idea for you to include an image of the HR map because this will help the reader to visualise the components that you're talking about. You also need to make sure that you include examples from the range of knowledge, skills and behaviours included on the map, and you need then to explain why they're important to HR professionals and their organisations. So here you could visit the map and select some of the professional areas or the behaviours. Click on those areas on the interactive tool and select the band that you think you're operating at. This will then open a PDF which will give you a full list of activities and knowledge that will help you to explain and evaluate what it means to be a HR professional. For assessment criteria 1.2, you're asked to briefly describe the elements of group dynamics and give at least 2 examples of conflict resolution methods within a HR context. So you'll find that videos 3 and 4 help with this question. Now, this assessment criteria requires that you describe how groups interact and how this sometimes gives rise to conflict. So essentially it covers 2 distinct and separate areas. So you should use a separate subheading to highlight that you have addressed each part. Now remember, the brief states that you should relate academic concepts, theories and professional practice with reference to key text, articles and other publications, and by using organisational examples for illustration. So you should describe the elements of group dynamics and refer to recognised models such as Tuckman and Belbin, and you will need to provide the source of your information. Don't just provide a list. Remember that the key verb here is describe. So you need to select the main stages and practices and then go on to provide an organisational example for context. So you should try to link the fact that with group dynamics there'll sometimes be conflict, and this will help you then to move on to describe methods that you can use to resolve conflict. Here you could refer to Kilman's model of conflict resolution, which covers 5 methods of conflict resolution. Remember, if you decide to include this, you'll need to state your source. You also need to include an organisational example, as this will help to demonstrate your understanding of the model. So some important points that you'll need to remember for this question are that you need to ensure you describe the elements of group dynamics, and remember to include a model of group processes. So you could use Tuckman, or you could use a way of capturing group dynamics such as interaction analysis tools. And you could also refer to Belbin and how the individual roles support the team. The next step is to ensure you provide a few examples of conflict resolution methods, and for this you could use active listening to understand the nature of the conflict from the perspective of the different parties. Or you could use Kilman's model that talks about the use of collaboration, the use of accommodating, which helps us to provide temporary relief from the conflict, the use of avoiding, or competing, or compromise. And when we use collaboration, we would be looking to use problem-solving skills, which would help us to try and seek a win-win situation. Moving on to assessment criteria 2.1, this one states, with reference to a recent or current project, and that can be a large or a small project that you've either led or you've been involved with, you need to provide evidence of using project management, and video 5 will help you with this question. So you should start by introducing the project that you've been involved with, and then you should structure your answer under appropriate subheadings to demonstrate the stages involved with project management. For this, you could use the initiation stage, the planning and design stage, the execution, the monitoring and control, and completion. Now remember, the brief states that you should relate academic concepts, theories and professional practice with relevance to key text, articles and other publications, and by using organisational examples for illustration. So you should explain each of the steps, providing organisational examples throughout. If you decide to include project plans, Gantt charts, evaluations or measurements as evidence, then you could place these in the appendices and refer to them in your answer. You need to remember to provide the source of your information. Now, some important points to remember for this assessment criteria are that you should ensure that you summarise the project that you have or you are working on, and remember that can be a large or a small project. And you need to remember to give some examples of how you've used project management techniques. So for example, when you set objectives, if you defined deliverables, identified resources, if you set deadlines and costs for the project, if you use risk management, and when you monitored and evaluated. Assessment Criteria 2.2 states that with reference to a recent or current project that you've led or been part of, so you can use the same project that you used for the last assessment criteria, you need to provide evidence of problem-solving techniques in the course of the project, and you'll find that video 6 helps you to answer this question. So you should expand on the previous answer, so expand on Assessment Criteria 2.1 by including how you solve problems. So here you need to ensure that you provide an example of a problem and then explain some methods that you use to solve it. So this might include consulting an expert, consulting with other parts of the business, consulting with customers and clients, or having regular communication and meetings to discuss the problem. Now you also need to ensure that you include why you chose the solution you did. So don't just provide the solutions, you need to provide evidence of how you reached the solution and why you chose that particular solution. So if you decide to include minutes of meetings, analysis, evaluations, or measurements as evidence, then you could place these in the appendices and refer to them in your answer. And don't forget, you'll also need to provide the source of your information. So the important points for this assessment criteria are that you should give an example of how you analysed and resolved any problems that you encountered during the project, and you also need to make sure that you include a justification, so you explain why you chose the solution that you used. For the next assessment criteria, 2.3, you're asked to explain how you successfully influenced, persuaded and negotiated with others in the course of the project, and you'll find that video 7 helps to answer this question. So again, you'll expand on the previous answers by explaining how you influenced, persuaded and negotiated throughout the course of the project. You should insert 3 subheadings to ensure that you address influencing, persuading and negotiating, and under each subheading you should briefly include an example of how you did this. Now it's important for you to remember not just to provide a list of the actions, because the key verb here is explain. Therefore, you need to persuade the reader of your argument by citing or including relevant organisational examples. So the important points to remember here are that you need to ensure that you give an example of how you influenced others. Then go on to provide an example of how you persuaded others, and then give an example of how you negotiated with others. And you need to remember to include examples of how you did this. Now you could include using analysis skills, risk assessment and options appraisals. Moving on to learning outcome 3, which is to be able to apply CPD techniques to construct, implement and review a personal development plan. So we'll start by having a look at assessment criteria 3.1, which is to undertake a self-assessment of one area of your practice to identify your professional development needs in that area and the options to address these. And you'll find that video 8 helps you to answer this question. So for this question, you'll need to consider an area of your professional practice. So the next stage is to view the CIPD HR profession map and identify the area which most closely matches your initial choice. So the map on the CIPD website is interactive. So you can click on one of the professional areas and it will provide more information about what the area involves. So remember, the key verb here is to undertake. So this means that you need to complete a self-assessment, against the information provided for your chosen area. So to do this, you would start by considering your strengths and development needs for that area. So an example would be that I would choose the professional area of employee engagement. So to do this, I go to the HR map, click on the employee engagement segment, which will give me more information and take me to a PDF. On opening the PDF, I can select band 2, which is the band that I think I'll operate at, and this will give me a full list of activities and knowledge which I would be expected to know or perform at band 2 for employee engagement. I then can have a look at the list and take or select some of the elements and decide, do I have a particular strength in that area, or is that area a development need? So for example, research skills are important for employee engagement, and I would consider this a strength. However, data analysis might be an area where I need to develop further. So you would consider this for a range of activities and knowledge within this professional area. The next stage for you is to consider the options that you could use to address the needs that you've just identified. So here you could consider a range from training, attending seminars, watching a webinar, you could job shadow in the workplace, or you could do a secondment. There's lots of different options, but you'll need to state the advantages and disadvantages of each of the options that you consider, and this will help you to decide whether that option would be an appropriate option for you. You should also consider, does the option meet your preferred learning style and does it fit with your career aspirations? So the example here for employee engagement would be that I could undergo in-house training, which would help me to improve on presenting and facilitating meetings and discussions. However, for me, trying to fit in training sessions isn't always easy, and I don't always have the time to be able to attend the session. As a kinesthetic learner, so I am a learner who likes to do things and put things into practice, whether this fits with my learning style depends on how interactive the training session is. So you can see that you'll need to work through a range of different options that you could use to address your development needs, and then make a statement to say whether they have an advantage, do they have a disadvantage, and do they fit with your career aspirations and your learning style. So you should work through a few options, and this will help you to justify the actual options that you choose when you produce your development plan. Assessment Criteria 3.2 asks you to produce a professional development plan to meet your professional development needs, and you need to include a justification of the options that you've chosen. And video 9 will help you to answer this question. So for this assessment criteria, you should choose 2 areas from the CIPD map that you can focus on for your own development for the next 6 months. And in addition to these 2 areas, you should choose to achieve the qualification that you're currently studying towards. So that makes a total of 3 objectives. Now remember, you should include the professional area that you identified and self-assessed against in Assessment Criteria 3.1. So for this part, you should consider each area and then identify, what do I want or what do I need to learn? So effectively, you'll be completing a self-assessment against both of the areas. So follow the same process that you did for Assessment Criteria 3.1. Then you can look at, what will I do to achieve this? And you will have already identified this for one of the professional areas as you completed this in 3.1. You'll also need to include, what resources or support will I need? What will my success criteria be? Or in other words, how do I know when I've achieved the objective? and set a target date for review and completion. Now, there are several templates that you can use, and there are templates available on the CIPD website. However, you can present your work in any format that you like. If you choose to use the assignment guide booklet, there's an example of a development plan that you could use. Now remember, if you don't use the development plan template, when you set your 3 objectives, you need to make sure that they are SMART. If you answer the questions on this screen, it will enable you and it will make sure that your objectives are SMART objectives. For the final assessment criteria 3.3, you are asked that during your programme you should provide a reflective summary of your performance against the plan. You should also identify any future development needs and record these in your PDP, and video 10 will help to answer this question. So for this assessment criteria, you need to complete a record which helps you to reflect on your progress towards achieving the objectives that you placed on your plan for assessment criteria 3.2. So for this assessment criteria, you'll need to actively seek out opportunities throughout the year or throughout the time spell that you're studying for, which will help you to develop and work towards achieving your objectives. Now, for each activity that you undertake, you should reflect on the activity. So you'd start by stating what you did. Then you'd move on to say why you did it, then what you learned from it, how you will use it or how have you used it, and are there any further actions. And you need to do this for each of the activities throughout the year or throughout the period of your studies. Now, your final reflection should be of your overall learning, and so you would consider how your development objectives or your needs have been met. And then you'll go on to consider how the development plan needs to be changed or developed in order to help you to continue with your professional development. So this is a section that you'll need to start as soon as your development plan is in place, and you'll need to continue to compile your record right the way through your studies. So although this is the final assessment criteria of this assignment, it's one that you should start as soon as your development plan is in place. So that brings me to the end of the assignment guide for the Developing Professional Practice module. So that leaves me with the chance to say good luck with your assignment. And remember, if you're struggling, don't suffer in silence. If you have any queries or if you need extra support or if you need a tutorial, then you can contact me on info@professionalfutures.com.